for a fire drill during this event. So if it does go off, just follow me out the door. Thank you.
Okay, 5, 4, 2.
Well, welcome to Omagh Library, and it is midway through Book Week NI. I'm really pleased to be here in Omagh today, to be able to sit and have a lovely chat with you all for the next hour, because I spend my life rushing around Northern Ireland, speaking to people for about 2 minutes at a time, summing up stories in 2 minutes. So to be here, to have a nice, cosy chat for a whole hour is an absolute pleasure and a real luxury. So thank you to everybody who's come along here in person today. Thank you to everybody who is tuning in online. Lovely to be with you all. Now, it's a great pleasure to welcome two Irish authors who are here with us today to talk about some of their recent work and to also talk about some of the writing process, the themes, and some of the themes in their books, and some of the challenging aspects of the books and the way that they went about writing them and developing the characters. It's fascinating to me. I'm always having to write about real life, and I'm always a bit envious of people who can write about anything in their imaginations. So I've got complete writer envy here today. So welcome to both of you. Welcome Louise Nealon and Niamh Campbell. It's a great pleasure to have you here.
Thanks a million for having us.
So first of all, let's give people a little bit of a sum up of what your books are about, first of all. We won't give any plot spoilers away, but first of all, we'll talk to you about Snowflake. It's a real coming of age story, isn't it? A girl, she grows up on a farm, loving family, eccentric mother, off she goes to university, and she's probably a little bit removed from the world in different ways, isn't she? So going to university is this big transition that she kind of struggles with a bit, doesn't she? How would you sum up for people what this book is about?
Okay, so that's a fairly good summary.
Okay.
I'll just sit here.
Okay, well that's the end.
So Snowflake is about Debbie, who grew up on a dairy farm like me, and went to college like me, and felt a bit alienated from the world like me. But the differences between us are maybe like there's parallels between me and Debbie, but where we differ is where the story really takes off. So there's quite like a supernatural element at the heart of the book, which is that Debbie, her mom Maeve, who's eccentric as you say, believes that she can dream other people's dreams, and she thinks that she's passed down this ability to Debbie kind of like genetically, and Debbie has kind of like a strained relationship with her mother, but she's really close to Billy, who sleeps in a caravan out the back of their house. And Billy kind of like assures Debbie that it's like the dream stuff is all nonsense, and to go off to college, and that's her kind of like escape route. But Debbie, as she kind of tries to navigate the world, she kind of sees how her mother has come to be the way that she is, and sort of sees like kind of the pitfalls as to how she could get there herself. So she's really, Debbie's at a real like vulnerable stage where we all are really when we're like 18, 19, 20, where it could really go any direction. And Billy's trying to like white knuckle it and try to steer her on the course. But it's about her kind of struggle to find her feet in the real world as an adult.
Yeah. And as you say, I could ask, where did you get the idea? But you've already made it quite obvious. These are all things that we go through growing up, some real personal things for you in terms of what you experienced growing up on a farm and going away to university. What was it about that made you want to write that in a book and really hone in on those personal experiences? Some people get lost in writing to take themselves to places, other worlds they'd never go. But this seems quite personal for you. What made you want to put that into a story?
Yeah, it wasn't really a sense of wanting, it was kind of like a need. And for me, I do read to like for pleasure and like escapism and stuff, but mainly I read for like medicinal purposes. So like I went through quite a rough period when I was like 18, 19, 20, for all the reasons that Debbie did. But for me, it was reading that was kind of like my anchor to the world around me. And I never thought that I would be in this situation where I'm next to Nealh Campbell and you, and people are actually listening to what I'm saying. And I feel...
And it's not a dream.
You know.
not like hers in the book.
No, yeah. I always thought that, like, I loved my secondary school English teacher, so I was like, maybe... I went to college and did the same course as my secondary school English teacher because I idolised her, and I was like, maybe I can be an English teacher. But I had really low self-esteem, so it was always kind of like, okay, I'll do anything apart from write full-time because that's not feasible. That's the message that I got from the world. No one actually came out and said it to me, but I kind of knew it myself. I also look quite young, so everyone, I feel still a child even though I'm 30 years old, and even when people come up at readings, like, that's the number one thing that they take away of, Jesus, you're very young. Like, yeah, I am, yeah. Sorry. I swear I'm not an embryo. I'm actually 30. And get nervous at Tesco checkouts trying to buy a bottle of wine. But anyways, the reason why I wrote the book was to kind of explore all of those insecurities, and it was a need. To go back to writing full-time came as an accident. I always wanted to do something else, so I wanted to cling to waitressing, or I really wanted to work in a library at one point, or be a lecturer was like the ideal. But this happened, and I'm just rolling with it. And yeah, it wasn't a case of wanting to write about the insecurities of my life. It was a need, and that's what happened. That's how it came out.
That's really fascinating. I'm always really interested by the way in which people came to writing, and by the way it actually then turned into a real job for people. You know, it's always fascinating because it usually is something very personal for people, hidden in there somewhere. Right, okay, Niamh, I'm going to ask you the same question about your book. I'm going to do my best to give it a little sum up without any plot spoilers. So This Happy is about Alana, who has had an affair with an older man, but it didn't last very long, but it had left a huge impression on her. Later on, she is married, and something reminds her of the past, and then she begins to wonder how things could have been different. And it's quite an introspective book, isn't it, about the thoughts and feelings that go on in our own head, really, in one sense. What gave you the idea for this? What was it about this that made you want to write this story?
Well, I think the book is mostly about, if it's about anything, taking seriously very volatile emotional situations, volatile emotional states, and going to the sort of nth degree with those, and really self-indulgent in a lot of ways in terms of like giving full space to the most irrational of emotions, most destructive of emotions in a female character. And I always wrote, but with this book, this is really the product of my post-PhD life when I was back in Ireland, having been living in London for a while. And I have a very emotional, volatile emotional life. I always have since I was a child. And so in and around the end of my 20s, I wanted to write a novel and properly explore this psychologically. So I was re-entering these states of very intense sort of depression and very intense erotic attachment and power and lust and slight, just veering from one state to another, and how you sort of anchor these in a narrative arc. And it was kind of that. It was like a safe space to explore my own fluctuating frame of mind when I was in my 20s. So I think it's more of an emotional book than it is a book with a plot. So essentially it's an attempt to do proper literary justice, I think, to maybe some of the worst, least palatable emotional states that you can get into, and the darker side of, I suppose, very strong emotional attachments to people.
Yeah, it's definitely sort of emotional exploration, isn't it? And I wonder for both of you, when you start to see those very private experiences that you've developed and you put them on the page, and for you say, actually, it was a place to go that gave you comfort and actually gave you confidence. How do you feel when that comes out of your head onto the page, and then it's out there for the world? Because it's no longer personal, is it? How do you feel when you put those books out there to people and they're actually reading them, and the reactions that you get back?
first of all, writing something and putting it outside of yourself that has a lot of personal energy in it, I find is like externalizing something that you kind of, for me anyway, you get over it. It is like it no longer is inside you. It's very much a process for coping with things, I think, and turning, I always try my students when I'm teaching them to write from life, I say, turn what you've experienced into a little monument. And then it's outside of you and you don't have to live with it anymore. So it's kind of cathartic in that way. But as it exists in the world, I think there's sort of been three responses. It's either people respond to it as an art object and to the style of the writing from a sort of cerebral perspective, or elements of it resonate with them because I try to be very honest about a lot of things, and the odd thing will kind of chime with people and they'll say back to me that they feel in some way seen. And the other one is a lot of angry responses and very harsh judgments on my character, because she's a real person.
Right.
There's quite a lot of that, and quite a lot of this sort of very energetic responses, which I consider to be interesting in and of themselves because they're often completely out of proportion.
Do you engage with those responses?
No, I just observe them and find it interesting. I think when someone's railing about my character as if she's real, I think I must have done a good job in that case. If you
Exceptionally
think
good.
this is a real person. And I think it sometimes things maybe they might strike a chord with people because I try to be very honest about less savoury and more scheming frames of mind that the character is in, because I was also trying to write against the idea that if you're writing a female protagonist, she's got to be universally good and always be set by things from without, and she can never be complicit or real. Because I think if we want to write real women characters courageously, you have to show the bad side. And I think that the response to that, which is negative, is maybe a space where people, or a sense in which people are not ready to look at that yet.
Yeah.
Because it might strike too much of a chord, maybe, and you recognise something in yourself. When you are developing, both these stories are about female characters, central characters here, and I suppose when you develop that character and they're going to be that focus point of the book, how do you both when did you go about developing the character, deciding who they would be, having had all these experiences and thoughts and emotions, and then going, right, who's going to be the vehicle for that? What sort of process did you go through for that?
So I don't have a lot of control over, I do, in a way. But with Debbie, she kind of started quite arbitrarily as an avatar of me at 18. And where she got interesting was when she started to think and do different things to what I would do. And that's because I put her in different situations. So going back to that question of how do you feel about like really personal things being in the book, I'm completely grand with it. My sister says that the fundamental difference between us is that she's quite put together and I go out with a hole in my tights. And I think that's an advantage when it comes to writing because the story is not mine anymore. As soon as it's in a book and out into the world, it becomes everyone's. And the responses that readers have are completely their own and they're nothing to do with me, which is why it's funny in interviews and talking like this that I often talk about things that aren't really in the book at all. It's just me. So I'm I'm more uncomfortable with that because the stuff in the book and Debbie isn't me. It is me more so than I know myself, because when you're writing, you're discovering stuff about yourself that you don't know. And I think that's the reason why people are a bit afraid of writing, or they see it as something mysterious. Like, I don't think if me and Niamh were carpenters that people would be here wondering how we do like carpentry. And it's quite like an emotional job. I take a lot of naps. And like with Debbie, the way that she came about was kind of, she started off as like a rough version of how I was at 18. And then she kind of like flourished into something else. Same with different characters in the book. Billy started off as kind of like the invisible friend that I wished that I had when I was younger. But then he kind of like grew legs of his own. And that's what I mean about not having control in the writing process or letting the characters take the lead. Because oftentimes I I try to push stuff into the book, or say like I'm trying to write a second book at the minute, and I'm like, okay, this happens, and then this happens, and really it's not about that. It's about being with the characters and waiting patiently and see what takes off, see what has traction. And that's the patience required, and that's the unknowing thing about fiction that I think protects us, because the stuff that's personal in the fiction is also, because it is fiction, it's able to be shared with everybody else, and it's like a communal sort of area.
It's interesting what you say about things that come out that you didn't even know were in there yourself, or you find a deeper level of something in yourself, and almost it seems to me what you're saying is that eventually you get a sort of click, and then the characters almost start to write themselves rather than you saying, yeah, this is going to happen. Do you find that as well?
Yes, definitely. And I think even more so writing my second book as well, because with the first book, with Alana, she is a very reactionary character, and in the space of the book, she doesn't really get a chance to get comfortable anywhere or grow. She doesn't really belong anywhere. So her character is very conditioned by this desperate attempt to find somewhere where she will fit in, and she's responding to that a lot. So when I was writing it, I was realizing that, you know, a lot of my own emotional volatility when I was younger was essentially just born of trauma and having nowhere to settle. And that is something that kind of comes with age. So I can look at her now as being this quite juvenile, this young person. She feels less and less and less in any way connected with me. But that was what I kind of realized in writing, and is that this person has nowhere that she belongs, and that is why she never stops moving and agitating and fretting. And that was what I was like. That was why I was like that. It was this kind of like lack of stable identity that was the driving force. So with maturity, I think the characters that I'm developing, they're different. They have much longer, older, more ancient grievances and complexities that I think are a little bit more sedate to write.
Sure. Did you get any reactions from people about the book that you weren't expecting, or that disagreed with your vision of things, or any sort of feedback?
Oh, it's gas. It's so funny, the things that people message me, because the internet is a great place full of wonderful weirdos. Like someone messaged me saying that they found like there's a part where Debbie describes going to the toilet, or like Niamh goes skinny dipping, and someone took really like umbrage to the fact that they were naked and that I described it, and how dare I. Like what Niamh says about like the angry reactions, and other people said like I shouldn't have made it a Trinity novel because there's a Trinity thing now, and I should have made Debbie work in McDonald's. And I was like, okay. But that's the thing about like separating yourself from the story. I went to this event actually, and a woman came up to me, and it was like she was inside my head. She was a woman in her 60s, and she had the most insightful readings into the book that were kind of like on the edge of my imagination, but weren't quite there. So right. She was kind of like...
She'd almost gone the extra step, right?
Oh my God, it was class. And it was such a pleasure to talk to her, because she was like, yeah, I read it a while ago, but I think like maybe Xanthi like fancied Debbie a bit. And I was like, oh. And I was like, that's quite interesting. And she was like she would have went with it, but Debbie's quite like homophobic or whatever. And I was like, oh, that's really interesting. And then she was like, she saw all these like kind of unseen things that I wasn't expecting anyone to I didn't think people properly read anymore. And it's a delight that people do. And to have that connection with someone and like see them in real life, it was so lovely.
And that's where the characters are alive, isn't it? When people can already imagine them going somewhere else, and you think, yeah, they would do that.
Yeah.
I'm interested in your journeys into becoming a writer. And how that sort of turned from something you enjoy to something that's a real reality. I know you had a very swift, sudden book deal. It came off the back of a competition. But first of all, Niamh, how did that happen for you? How long did you want to be a writer for, and how did it all work itself out?
It actually came out very quickly for me in the end as well. I always wanted to be a writer from when I was really small onwards. It was all I ever wanted to do. And then I went to college and studied English, and I did a PhD, and I stopped writing creatively for years. And I sort of forgot about that ambition because I was going to be an academic instead. And then I finished my PhD, came back to Ireland, worked in a minimum wage job, was stuck living at home. I had no job in academia. It was over. It looked like it was completely over for me. And I was thinking about what I had originally wanted to do. And I was very depressed and very angry at kind of how things had worked out. I think I was about 26. So I thought, well, I've got nothing to lose. I may as well start writing. And I remember like adding up how much of my salary I could save over 2 years, and could I move to a shack in the middle of nowhere and just go feral. And then a bursary opened in Ireland in the Decade of Commemorations. It was for 2016. And for the first time, you could get a funding from the Arts Council if you had never published anything, which before that point you had to be established. So it was just a luck. And I went for it and I got it and I quit my job, and I've been writing full time more or less ever since then. So it was that was 2016 that I got it, and then I sold the book in 2018. So it was just 2-year turnaround, and then it all began.
Also very, very swift.
Very lucky.
For you. And how is life as a writer then? I mean, how would you just describe it to somebody? Because you're kind of your own boss, but you have to also be disciplined. There must be the fear about where the next idea is coming from. It's not like, I'm lucky, news just happens for me and then I go write about it. You guys have to come up with this stuff. So how is life like that?
I find when I'm writing full-time, I can't really do that for too long because it gets very formless and very lonely. It's a very isolating job. And you don't really see other people very much. It's tricky to do it. And I do teach in an academic context now as well, and I lecture. So I like to kind of do the two, because I like to see people and have a sort of more ordinary life and then go back to the writing. But at the same time, the risk is always that the demands of the job are too much and that you can't do the writing. Mm. So it's trying to balance these two things. I did it full time for 1 year, and it was just quite magical, but it was very self-contained time. And I think it would be too isolating for me to do it all the time. And the money is too irregular. As well.
When you were doing it full time, did you have any disciplines? Did you have any targets of how many pages a day and things? Was that your method?
Yeah, I got up at 4 o'clock every morning and I wrote for 2 hours.
Oh my goodness!
Yeah, it was really crazy. And then I would go back to sleep for a while, and I rode my bike and I meditated, and I did a lot of slightly kooky mystical practices, which I won't talk about because they weren't all legal. And I had a weird year of sort of exploring the mind. But I was quite rigid about 4 o'clock in the morning.
Did it help the writing? Or was it
I think it did. I mean, it produced this book, which is a bit of a mad book. So I don't do that anymore, because now I have to be a lot more, like, you can't get up at 4 o'clock in the morning. One thing that happens is that you have no social life because you have to go to bed at 9 o'clock at night. Yeah. So you just live like a nun, really. You don't have any fun. So I did it just for 1 year. But the 4 o'clock thing, I did it because I was very inspired at that time of the day. I didn't want anyone else around. I didn't want any references to the ordinary world. I just wanted to be entirely in this private bubble. And then I would just have this kind of golden, maybe till 7 o'clock, and then my housemates would get up. So I did it like that.
That's interesting. So Louise, any 4 o'clock alarm calls for you?
God, no, I love sleep. I really do.
Yeah, me too.
I'm so jealous of that. Sounds wonderful. I'm living on my own at the minute in Belfast, and I'm excited about the year ahead and of writing full time. But like Niamh says, it is lonely, and that's why stuff like this is really, really nice, because you're reminded of what can happen when you get the story out. It's lovely to talk to people, but it's weird because it's not talking to people normally. Like, especially after COVID, I thought, because I have quite bad social anxiety, and I thought that I was getting way better at talking to people. But it only turned out I was good at talking about my novel. So when I'm in like a normal situation with people, and a lot of people don't know anything about my life, and then I felt like, oh, like I'm still struggling to kind of like relate to people. So I'm in a weird headspace right now because I'm in the world of my second book, and it's quite hard to move from that energetically just into the humdrum of every day. And when I was living at home, it was kind of easier because like my little niece was pottering around all the time. So I was kind of like, you're brought down to earth quite quickly by children and washing machines and dishwashers and other members of your family not really caring about what you do. Whereas when I'm in my own space, I have to learn to clock off more, because I think about my imagination nearly all the time, and that's really exhausting.
Yeah.
So, like, it's not like a proper 9-to-5 job, and I tried to do it as a proper 9-to-5 job, and it didn't work because it's just a different type of labour.
So the real structured approach.
It doesn't work for me. But like Niamh, like if I get 2 hours writing done a day, I'm like, that's great. I sit down, light a candle, make myself a cup of tea. I have a writing blanket, and it's just like sitting down to do anything else really, like knitting or like writing a letter. I try not to be afraid by the blank Word document or. But it's the things that you do around it as well. Like I do yoga and go for a walk and go shopping. It's all very boring, all very, very boring.
No, these are the great joys of life, and nap time.
Yeah.
I'm with you on that.
Oh my God, nap time is essential.
I think I'm spiritually Spanish or something, because I'm sure I need a siesta every day. Now, I love the way that you wrote this short story, which was then published. And off the back of that, you won this competition, which then led to a book deal, and happened really quickly, didn't it? What was that like for you? Was it a complete shock? Was it completely out of the blue?
Yeah. So, like Niamh, I've always wanted to be a writer, but just didn't think that it was possible. And I did a master's in Belfast and loved it. But it gave me perspective on the fact that I wasn't the greatest writer in the world, because there are other people in my class who are better than me. And that was, I learned loads, but I was kind of like, if I'm not even the best in this class, like, there's such a minute possibility of ever getting published. And so after that master's finished, I went home. I tried to waitress for a while, waitress and write, which just didn't work. And so I went home and I was quite depressed, and I wrote a short story. It was the only thing that I wrote that year, and I lobbed it into a couple of competitions, like you would like doing the Euro Millions or the lottery or something, not really expecting anything back. And I got an email saying that I'd won, and I thought it was spam. And I rang the number at the end, and it wasn't spam, it was completely real. And that was great. It was the Cork Short Story competition, and I went down for the week, and they put me up in a hotel for a week, which I was like, and I did a week course with Claire Keegan, who's one of my favourite writers, and I met so many people that week, and that kind of made it a reality for me that it could happen. And so I met my agent from that. It was the story was reprinted in the Irish Times under the headline "Irish Bad Sex Story." My mom was on the phone to my aunties being like, if you Google Louise Nealon and bad sex, it should come up. And it did. I got lots of angry responses, mostly from men, presuming that I was the character in the book. And I got lots of sex advice from middle-aged men.
Thanks for that.
Yeah, and in a public forum underneath the article.
Right.
Anyways, it was very interesting. But I got my agent from that, off the back of that, and she was just wonderful and really supported me. And it was a sequence of events that, if it didn't happen, I don't know where I'd end up, really.
Yeah.
So a lot of luck was involved.
Amazing time for you. I love the idea of those reactions. Like, you were just too shy to ask for the advice. You just wrote a whole story.
Yeah.
And thanks, guys, for mansplaining this for us. Anyway, I'm also interested really how lockdown was for you both, and the crazy world we've lived in for the last, keep saying year, but it's more than a year now, isn't it? You know, going back to March 2020. How's that time been for you? I suppose from the outside, people think, well, this is a dream for writers. Isn't this exactly what you want? You've become hermits now. We can all lock ourselves away, and you guys can just write to your heart's content. Was lockdown a good thing or a bad thing for writers? Because I suppose on the flip side, you're losing that contact with the outside world that perhaps inspires you and gives you ideas as well. So how did you both find it? How was it for you? Because I'd imagine it might be a sort of paradise for you, was it maybe? Or not so much?
Preoccupied for the first year because the book came out in lockdown. So and I won the Sunday Times Audible short story competition in lockdown. So all of the media and the jobs that followed from that were all during lockdown. So I was actually busy writing to commissions a lot, which I'd never done before. And then after that, it just got very, very boring and I couldn't write.
Right.
Really couldn't.
So
There was no input, there was no output. And it made me realise that all my adult life, I have guarded my time very viciously because I was always trying to save my writing from other commitments. And now I had all this time and that I didn't want it anymore. So I'm more aware now as a writer that I need input from other people and I need to be more sociable than I have been. So I actually learned that from it really, but I'm very relieved that it's over. And I don't think it was inspirational or helpful. It just became so mundane in the end.
Sure. How about you?
Almost exactly the same word for word answer. Yeah, the book came out in lockdown, so I was doing a lot of interviews and stuff and podcasts, but that was all done online, which is lovely because you're able to wear your pajamas like on the bottom half. And yeah, it was very boring. Lots of people who were usually extroverts had loads of energy during lockdown and baked and did podcasts and
TikToks,
wrote and I did absolutely nothing.
Yeah, I think I think a lot of people felt that suddenly we had this pressure to use this time amazingly well and either publish a book or have a baby in lockdown or sort of start up some other amazing company. And there were so many stories like that. And then actually I had moments like that too. I was just feeling like, and I had a job to go to, report the news, and goodness knows, lots of news, most of it quite depressing, but it did get difficult to maintain those routines because you didn't have to get into an office. I love my pajamas as well. There's lots of online writing you can do without getting dressed, but you lose that sense of rhythm, don't you, in life, and that sort of sense of connecting with people.
It does give you perspective, though. It gives you perspective and appreciation for how life used to be and how you will. Like, I know that I'll be different moving forward because of lockdown, and I think we all will.
Yeah, very, very strange time. Now, we talked about the sort of personal aspects of life experiences that have been, and writing has been a great outlet for that. What about when you find ideas for characters from other people that you see? Where did the idea for her mother come from? Sort of eccentric, mental health issues, all sorts of things, dating a guy who's 12 years younger than her, just 6 years older than her daughter. Where did you get the idea for that character?
Yeah, so Maeve is an interesting character. She's in lots of ways my favourite character, but she was scary to write because I kind of imagined the worst case scenario of where my mental health could end up. And I had quite an obsession with dreams when I was younger, and it kind of like it became an obstruction to the way that I moved in the world. I used to be kind of want to be an academic, and I thought that if I was an academic, it would protect me from the world. So the more obsessed with dreams I became, I thought that it was kind of like a barrier. And Maeve's tabernacle, like the room that she writes in and her bedroom, is kind of like her bunker in an uncontrollable world. And all of this thing, it's mysterious enough to make her interested because we don't know anything about dreams, or we know very little. So it's a really rich area to explore fictionally, but also intellectually. And I thought, how bad would my life get if, say, I had a child really young, say I couldn't manage my finances, I became agoraphobic, all of the things that Maeve is. And then I feared judgment from other people. Maeve is kind of like a social pariah. Everyone sees her as kind of like promiscuous, not to be trusted, kind of like a wagon, and selfish. And her brother Billy kind of like takes care of her, and she's quite disabled in the novel. So Maeve came from my projection of how bad it could get if I couldn't develop the other areas of my life and only developed or was interested in that dream obsession. And if all the uncontrollables got to the extent where it was just like, it was an absolute free-for-all. But yeah, like Billy came from Tommy Tiernan. I was obsessed with him as a comedian, like his early stand-up, and the kind of like wildness of it. And I really wanted to be friends with him, but obviously as a 16-year-old girl, you can't go to a pub and befriend a 40-year-old man. So I just made him into an invisible friend, and kind of like his on-stage persona, I imagined Billy, but then that grew legs. And sometimes you're really lucky and someone like walks into a room. The best people to write about are people that you know very, very little about, like your dad's friend of a friend. Or someone walks into a room and you're like, you're an absolute gift of a person. Yeah. And you kind of don't want to know them. You just want to.
You've already imagined it.
You just want to project.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I have people, I'm a bit nosy, funny that being a journalist, but you know when you sit at a cafe and you sometimes end up eavesdropping on conversations, but I still remember characters from sitting and having a cup of tea and they were somewhere across the room, but because they caught my eye and I maybe heard a few words of what they said and then imagined what their lives were like, really quirky characters, and I still can remember them 10 years later, and they must think I must be crazy if they ever knew, because they'd never know who I am or had ever met me. But I know what you mean about that, in that you could suddenly build a whole world around somebody just because they've walked through the door or done something a little bit funny or something that catches your eye. You're nodding, Niamh. Do you find that the bits of imagination or parts of yourself will that actually sort of flourish into a whole character on their own rather than basing it on somebody else you know really, really well?
Yeah, definitely. I would find it very hard to write people I know very well. It would just feel like you're too close to them. And I think it's really interesting.
That, they might not be too flattered.
Yeah, no, they wouldn't be. No, they don't like it. People think they're in your things as well when they're not sometimes.
Yeah.
There's already that. I think it's really interesting, Louise, that you extrapolate from yourself to make them other character and kind of follow that most concentrated form. Because in my second novel, I'm writing as a male character who is sort of a bit of a man about town and can't commit to anybody and is sort of a bit of a rogue. And I originally thought I was writing someone different to me, but as I was writing, I began to realize that there was a lot of myself in this perspective, this kind of masculine side of my personality, or this privacy that I have where I'm only interacting superficially with other people. So that I could understand his motivation, then it became more interesting. But also earlier in the year, I wrote a short story, which fortunately was rejected by a magazine because I wrote it about someone I just heard some gossip about. And then I ended up being at a dinner party with this person, which sort of played out quite close to the story I had written. So as if it manifested itself in some kind of way, and I thought, if this person reads this story, they're going to think I wrote it after this interaction, but I didn't. I just kind of took it from the twinkle of gossip about them, which I will sometimes do, or someone's energy or vibe, you'll just think, oh, I totally love that, I'm going to take that.
I'm going to take it. Do you ever get that you're chatting to someone, I mean, I get this as a journalist, but you're chatting to people at a party or something, and then they go, oh, you're going to write a story about this now? And you're like, no, I'm just really interested. And it becomes really hard to actually ask anyone really innocent questions when you're out and about, because everyone thinks you're after a story, or they're going to suddenly appear in something. And I'm like, no, relax. I just love hearing about people's lives. It's okay. Do you ever have to reassure people they're not going to end up in one of your books or something?
Yeah. My friend had a festival, like a little mini one, just after lockdown, loads of restrictions, blah, blah, blah. But this guy came up and he was like under the influence of everything. And he was like, oh, Jesus, no, you're going to write about this. And I was like, you haven't even done anything.
I know.
But he was so paranoid about it. He was like, I need to leave. And then I was like, no, please don't go on my behalf. But yeah.
I'm so glad that happens to you guys too, though, because I get tortured with it. It's funny, we stand outside court sometimes with a camera, because you might be filming one person walk in for a really high profile trial, but there'll be 30 other people who come in for like really boring court cases and things. Everyone thinks the camera is there for them, and you're like, your traffic ticket or whatever is not that interesting. Please, they come in and they cover themselves up like with great energy, like as if you're going to be following them. You're like, no, please don't worry. It's a really high profile case. It's not you today. Don't worry. But everyone does worry about that kind of thing these days.
The opposite of that is like, do you know the horse racing where people are like behind the camera and they come up behind the reporter and they're like,
I know. And then when you nobody wants to be on, and then suddenly when you want an actual clear background, everyone wants to be a TV star. Yeah, have that all the time. Now I'm interested in how you approach a second book then, because does the pressure suddenly build when you've done really well with one and suddenly it's like, right, now you have to do it again? Is that a great joy because of the opportunity and you've got the confidence knowing, well, I've done it once, it's worked out, I know I can do this for real? Or do you suddenly feel the pressure and the fear of trying to replicate something else and make it better or as good? How do you feel about that at the moment, Niamh?
I really enjoyed writing the second one, and I wanted to write something very different. And I tried, I wrote the first one in the first person and the second one in the third person. And the liberation was lovely because it was just so much more, it sort of felt like the stakes were lower and the canvas was broader. But I did write it quite quickly before the first one came out because I thought I might get psyched out when the first one came out and that I might find it hard to write. But no, it was actually really great. And I'm on the third one now, but I'm very early, but I really enjoy it. It does give me confidence, I think, to have an audience and to have good reviews and feel like there's maybe a bit of a dialogue now where you know that people are going to hear what you say. And I actually found it really enjoyable. So far it hasn't tripped me up too much yet.
How about you, Louise?
Yeah, I'm actually reading Niamh's second book. It's a gorgeous cover. It's called We Were Young. When is it out?
February.
Yeah, it's gorgeous. But I was really interested to hear your answer because it doesn't feel laboured at all. I'm very jealous because yes, I am terrified of the second book, and it's so great to have this validation. But also, I was with these characters for 10 years, and I kind of grew up with them, and I felt very attached. And now I kind of have this. Do you know, like I'm with a new cast of characters, but I actually don't know them that well, and I'm kind of like, do I want to commit? And I know that I have to because I'm contractually obliged to write a second book. But if I'm being very honest, I do feel the pressure, and I am finding it tough. But I'm also, I was going to write a sequel, just because I didn't want to let go of the characters. But I decided against it because I needed the distance and I want to challenge myself. It's kind of like,
think you go back to it and do a sequel then?
In the future, maybe. But I just don't think it's the right time to do it now because I left them in quite a good place and I don't want to like upheave that for the sake of... What I don't know is I don't know the story. And I don't know the story of the second one, which is okay because I also don't know the characters and I don't know what's going on. But it's okay to feel like that. Yeah. And as long as I keep writing, whether it's a failure or not is irrelevant. Well, it's not irrelevant. But yeah, no, I'm terrified, yeah. Yeah,
It's a nice way of looking at it. What do you have any advice for other writers or other people who maybe have never believed they could do it or have thought about it but haven't put pen to paper? What advice might you give others? Do you get asked that much?
Yeah,
I have been asked it before. I think I would say be as original, as sort of loyal to yourself as possible. And just write whatever you want to write. Don't feel like you need to follow any kind of a trend. Be as close to what you, like decide what you want to achieve and just stick with that because I think you'll have far better success and more fun if you really are writing the book that only you can write, as they say. I would say that.
Yeah, I would say go easy on yourself. Be kind to yourself because the reason that I didn't write for years or why I don't write as much as I would like to is because I have an inner critic who just goes, well, this is just a waste of time, isn't it? And there's no point. And if you there's this myth that you have to go through a really difficult life in order to be a writer. That like the poverty myth just isn't true. Anybody can be a writer at any age, and I think a good gauge of whether you're have any aptitude at writing is, in my experience, the people who are hard on themselves, the people who are saying, oh God, no, I'm definitely not reading that out loud, or no, that's not going to go anywhere. That's a fairly good indication that there's something of value
Right.
in the story.
Because it's so it's precious
Because
about it,
well,
so it must,
because
or fearful.
I think there's a fear attached to writing, and getting over that fear, whether you're good at it or not. Like there's so many advantages to writing just for yourself, like getting to know yourself and being able to spend time in your own company and getting down memories that like you otherwise wouldn't get down. Like I keep a journal, and it's not because of any sort of literary pursuit or it's completely opposite from my actual writing practice. It's just something for me. But it also really helps my writing practice because it's when I write least self-consciously. I'm not trying to come up with like a simile here and a metaphor there, or like a character or a setting. There's so much to enjoy with writing, and you shouldn't use it as another stick to beat yourself with.
Torture yourself.
And you don't have to be a bestseller. You don't have to publish a book. But if you want to publish a book, there are so many avenues that you can go down, and like believing that it can happen is probably the best way to go about it, because I definitely didn't think that it would happen.
It's very easy to be a tough self-critic, isn't it? How much of your own stuff do you end up discarding? And do you ever show anyone little bits, or do the whole thing and then show someone at the end? What about for you, Niamh? Is there ever a temptation when you've got a fair few chapters down and you're comfortable that you might show it to anybody, or how do you work it for yourself?
No, I never show it to anyone.
Never show anyone.
No, and then I send it to my editor, and that's all.
Right.
I did send one version of this one to 2 friends of mine because they asked to read it, and I sent one to a male friend, one to a female friend who are both writers, because I'd written a male protagonist, and I wanted to see if he was persuasive. So I had one worry, and that was that I had written a male protagonist that wasn't believable. So that was kind of interesting to get the 2 bits of feedback. In both cases, I didn't integrate any of it, but I think I did get some help with finishing it, but I don't have that sense where I need anyone else's approval for anything. I don't have an inner critic on that level. Maybe I'm a bit lucky, or just, I do think if I could give another piece of advice, what worked for me was, a very evolved sense of pretension and arrogance, which is also my shield, because I get a lot of criticism for being arch and too literary. And that is something people like to complain about these days, because they don't like to do any work when they're reading. And I had to become solid in my conviction that I have a style, and if you don't like it, you don't have to finish the book. And that helped me get to this point where it was like, I'm not asking anyone's permission. If I think I've done what I wanted to achieve, and there are things I've written that are out there that I don't think are good anymore, and I am like, damn it. But at the moment when I put them out there, I thought it was. It's just me where I was at that point. So I kind of forgive it and let it go. But no, I don't feel that. I think it's just, the whole arc of my sort of being a writer, my personality and my career has always been in opposition to what people around me thought I should do, to the point where, they ended up just giving up and leaving me alone. But I've gotten so used to just saying, well, I'm going to do it anyway, that it doesn't occur to me to need help anymore. Yeah. So maybe this will end up being a fatal flaw someday, but so far, it mostly helps me just concentrate on what I'm doing and not worry about it too much.
That feeling of doing something you're pleased with, and then suddenly a few weeks or months or years later you look back, and it's a funny thing. I get it with news reports all the time. I hate looking back at archive stuff, because on the day it felt it was so necessary, and we were proud that we achieved this, and might have gone through so many hurdles to get this on, and we were pleased at the end of the day, and you look back and you think, I didn't choose the right words, or that sentiment, I didn't quite sum up that sentiment. Of course, news is all very factual, but there's also a lot of emotion in the people's stories that you're trying to tell, and you really want to get it just right, because otherwise you sort of haven't quite got the story perfect, have you? You're just trying to sum up a bit of human emotion, and even in the world of factual news, like I completely identify with that feeling of maybe later on thinking there were better words you could have used. Do you throw much away, or do you find that actually once you're writing, it is the stuff that you're keeping?
Yeah, I keep nearly everything. If something doesn't go into a novel, it will often become a short story. There's a couple of things at the moment that didn't get anywhere. I can think of one essay from about 3 years ago that never got anywhere, and it's kind of still dormant and maybe just never going to get anywhere. But some things, like might get rejected as a short piece somewhere, and I'll put them away and come back and cannibalize them. But I do tend to reuse everything, because when I'm writing, I don't write a lot in one go. I write quite slowly, so I think I'm editing as I go all the time as I write, so I don't tend to have something big and then cut it, so I will use everything, but I think it's just the way that it comes out.
No, that's interesting. How about you? Do you have a sort of hate the page I just wrote the day after or anything like that?
Like I went through like self-sabotage, deleting the whole document, that sort of thing. But I don't write an awful lot. What happens is like I'd write a paragraph, but then like go over it loads. Not everything gets used for me, because or it goes through drafts. But the drafts, like the first draft of my novel, say, was just like a billion drafts of me just like working on the same paragraph before moving on. If that makes sense. When I find there's an event actually called 10 by 9 in Belfast. It's where 9 people have up to 10 minutes to tell a story that's true from their lives. And I went to it for the first time when I was in college, studying my master's in creative writing, and I had like a really big block during my master's because I wasn't the best person in the class. Shock horror. And I was like, well, there's no point in anything I write because theirs is going to be better. And I went to my first 10 by 9, and there was a guy, Paul Hutchinson is his name. He was hilarious. It's like stand-up comic. And he was telling the story about this guy called Sachet. And it was just the way that he said the name Sachet. And like the story stuck with me like for like months and months afterwards. And I was like, okay, if I just like write a bit for like a piece for 10 by 9, and if I like try to get it in. So that became like my like writing goal, even though it had nothing to do with my course or career or anything. But I just moved back to Belfast now, and I'm finding it tough to get going on the second book. So I signed up for 10 by 9 again. And it's like when you kind of like have a deadline, any sort of deadline, and because it's like kind of a story that's true to your life, and you kind of have the backup of 9 other people or 8 other people with you. It's something like really like it really like kind of like gets me going and gets me into the headspace for writing. So when I find that I can't write, or that I'm writing absolute garbage, I write a piece for 10 by 9, I do it, and then I'm like, okay, that's kind of like the training wheels.
Right, yeah,
you know?
It's like really focusing it back down again, having a hard deadline. I know all about deadlines. If I didn't have the 6 o'clock news to aim for, my pieces would never be finished.
Yeah.
It's just the utter fear of the bongs going and the headlines going and there being a black hole is enough to make you finish writing anything. If I didn't have that, I don't know how I'd sort of motivate myself.
And it just distills it down to actual storytelling and having a story to tell. Whereas like I'd kind of like agonize over like paragraphs and the aesthetics of like how it looks on the page, whereas like when you rip all of that away and it's just like, okay, you've got 10 minutes to tell a story,
this many words, that's the duration.
It's so useful, and I really recommend the event. It's in the Black Box in Belfast, but they did loads of like lockdown editions, and they have a podcast as well. It's very, very funny.
Okay, well, speaking of deadlines, we are sort of approaching 2 o'clock, but there is a few minutes left. Does anybody have any questions? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Anything that we've been said today that's just sparked something that anyone would like to ask at all? I know we're streaming live, but don't be shy. It's all right. We can ask them. Yes, hi.
Do either of these young ladies have a social life, I wonder?
Well, that would just be too much.
Burn!
What do you do?
Wow. I do, shockingly. I actually moved to Belfast because most of the friends I made in college live in Belfast. I like being friends with other writers and other artists. Thanks a million. But I also play camogie for my local team. So I've got some friends who have no idea what I do for a living, and other friends who are quite interested and understanding. So
I get to see tucked away writing away.
Writing forever. Forever. How about you, Niamh?
Yes, I have loads of friends who are not writers. I don't think I have any friends who are writers, maybe 2 that I can think of really, yeah. So since lockdown lifted and I moved into Dublin, the city, I've been too busy, actually. I have a lot of social life and not as much writing as I used to do, actually, so I need to get the balance back. But during lockdown, there was a long period of absolute nullity, so I'm kind of keen to make up for that now.
Yeah, it's good to work hard and play hard as well, isn't it? I don't have too many friends who are journalists because I think if I did, we'd never shut up about the news and COVID and all that kind of thing.
With the work hard, play hard thing, I work very gently and slowly. And I also play, like my idea of a night out is like a cup of tea and a scone. That's nice. So yeah, my idea of a social life is quite gentle too. But I do enjoy myself, yeah.
Well, on that note, unless any more burning questions are around, we are, oh yes, hello, you're just in there before the...
Okay, well then I'll make it brief. Maybe you can hear me, maybe you can't. I wonder sometimes when you're starting your story, do you actually have a timeline? You know, like,
Oh, yeah.
I don't mean dates for you to complete by, I mean an actual time scale that the story covers. Is it 10 years, is it 12 years, is it 6 weeks?
Yeah.
And the other thing I wanted to know was, when you do write it, and say you do see it the next day, and you go, that's SH1T, I don't like it, and scrap it. Do you go again and say, I'll admit that totally, or do you really try and get that section right? And also, being nosy, like a lot of people are, but maybe don't admit to, if you meet a man, and this is very sexy stuff to me, of course, do you tell them for the first time, do you say what you are, or if they ask you, or do you make up stories and say, no, I'm such and such, you're the person in your book, or whatever?
Answer that one first, I'm curious.
So the guy thing is very interesting. They don't like writers. They really don't. So sometimes I just say, like, I'm a waitress or I work in a library. When I do say the writer thing, they immediately Google me. And then they give a review of the review in the paper, even though they haven't read the book. So yeah, I'm trying to date at the minute, and it's very weird. But yeah, so that's men. With the timeline thing, it happens over the course of the novel. How that's a very technical question. It's great. And the first thing is like whether you're writing it in the present tense or the past tense. So you figure that out. For this story, I started writing it in the past tense, and then I realized that it was present tense. So there's lots of finicky bits and that I had to tie up, and there was so much, like, I did not just like start this at the start and just finish it. I started in the middle, and then there was different chapters and sections that I did. And then, so it wasn't I started at the start, and I went to the stuff that I was interested in. So I went to the scenes that I was interested in, that I really needed to tell. Not that the scenes that I felt like I had to tell or to link up this, that came at the very end. But even with that, when I was writing scenes that I felt like I had to write, I was like, oh geez, I'll just write this. They didn't work because I wasn't interested in them. And that was the best lesson for me, was like if I had a plot or like an outline of how I wanted the story to go, I probably wouldn't write the story at all because I'd already know what happened.
You're explaining too much.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's like trying to piece together a jigsaw or weave different bits together. But yeah, and then it happens so much where you're like, I'm a genius, like writing one day, and then the next day you're like, what is that? Sometimes I scrap it, sometimes it's salvageable. But yeah, it depends on the scene. Thanks for the question. No way.
Yes. Niamh, do you tell people you're a writer when you first meet them?
Yes. My most famous piece of writing is a short story about my ex-boyfriend. So there's always a moment when they have to Google that and find out about it, or they already know me through the story, which has happened. I get sex scenes from the book recited back to me And I think they like it. I think they want to be in the next book. I think they like Living Dangerously.
They-
Definitely a vibe of that.
They
isn't
always
it?
think that they're going to be
Yeah.
in the next book, even if you haven't met them in real life.
They want to be in the next book.
They secretly want to. Oh, okay. Well, look, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking to both of you. Thank you for brilliant questions. Thank you. You know, your writing, your books are winning lots of praise and prizes. So I would love it if you haven't picked up these books, go away. I'm thoroughly enjoying them at the moment. I'm a bit of a serial reader. I read things in parallel, so I'm sort of 3/4 of the way through both of them, and I sort of chop and change between books. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. It depends what mood I'm in. Lovely to talk to you. Thank you for coming along. Thank you for taking part in Book Week Northern Ireland. Lovely of you to have been here. Been a great audience here in Omagh. It's been a great pleasure, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming.